I never imagined that moving to a quiet mountain community in rural Colorado would turn me into a paranoid property owner who obsesses over firewood carriers. But here we are. My name is Ryan Morrison, and I bought a 3-bedroom cabin in Pine Ridge Estates about 18 months ago. The development sits just outside Woodland Park, Colorado, nestled in the mountains with stunning views of Pikes Peak. When my wife died from cancer 3 years earlier, I needed a fresh start. My job as a software consultant lets me work remotely, so I sold our house in Denver and headed for the hills. The cabin cost me a pretty penny, but it came with 2 acres of wooded land, a detached garage, and a peace of mind I desperately needed. What I did not know when I signed those papers was that Pine Ridge Estates had an HOA run by a woman who made dictators look reasonable. Her name was Deborah Henderson, but everyone called her Deb behind her back. To her face, though, most neighbors called her Mrs. Henderson, with the kind of forced respect you give to people who hold power over your property. Deb was in her early 50s, with that specific haircut that seems to be issued along with HOA board positions. You know the one. Blonde highlights, shorter in the back, and always perfectly styled. She wore pastel cardigans even in summer and had a collection of decorative reading glasses on chains around her neck. She drove a white Lexus SUV that she parked diagonally across 2 spots at the community mailboxes. For the first few months, I flew under her radar. I kept my grass cut to the regulation height, my exterior paint matched the approved color palette, and I did not make waves. Winter came hard that year, with snow starting in October and not really letting up until April. That is when I learned why everyone in the mountains has a serious relationship with their firewood supply. My cabin had a beautiful stone fireplace that served as supplemental heat, and I loved having a fire going on cold nights. The woodshed on my property was a simple structure, about 10 feet by 12 feet, with 3 walls and a slanted roof. The previous owner had left it stocked with a decent amount of seasoned pine and aspen. I added to it throughout that first fall, buying cords from local suppliers and stacking them neatly inside. To move the wood from the shed to my house, I had invested in a really nice firewood carrier. It was not just any carrier. This thing was heavy-duty canvas with reinforced leather handles and metal rivets. It could hold a serious load of logs without tearing or straining your back too badly. I had paid nearly $80 for it online, and it was worth every penny. I kept it hanging on a hook just inside my woodshed for easy access. The first time it disappeared, I assumed I had misplaced it. It was a Tuesday morning in January, and I went out to bring in some wood for the evening. The carrier was not on its hook. I searched the woodshed, thinking maybe it had fallen behind the stacks. Nothing. I checked my garage, my mudroom, even my truck bed in case I had absent-mindedly tossed it in there. Still nothing. I was annoyed but not overly concerned. I figured it would turn up. In the meantime, I carried wood in armload by armload like some kind of pioneer, which was significantly less efficient and got bark and dirt all over my jacket. 3 days later, I was driving back from the grocery store in town when I passed Deborah Henderson's house. Her property sat near the entrance of our development, a sprawling ranch-style place with professional landscaping, and one of those signs that said the Hendersons in cursive script. And there, clear as day, sitting on her front porch next to her neatly stacked firewood, was my carrier. I recognized it immediately. It even had the same small tear near one of the bottom corners where I had caught it on a nail. My first instinct was to pull into her driveway right then and confront her, but I took a breath. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she had found it somewhere and did not realize it was mine. though how a firewood carrier walks itself from my property to hers, a quarter-mile away, remained a mystery. That evening I walked over to her house. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered peaks orange and pink. Deb answered the door wearing a pink fleece pullover and holding a glass of white wine. "Ryan," she said, with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "What brings you by? Hey, Mrs. Henderson, I think there might have been a mix-up. I noticed a firewood carrier on your porch that looks exactly like mine. Mine went missing from my woodshed a few days ago." Her expression did not change. "Oh, that old thing? I have had that for years. Bought it from a catalog." I kept my voice level. "The thing is, it has a distinctive tear near the bottom corner. My carrier has that exact same tear. I am pretty sure it is mine." "Well, mine has a tear too," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "Happens when you use things regularly. These carriers all look the same, do not they? I would really appreciate taking a closer look at it, if you do not mind." Her smile disappeared entirely. "I do mind, actually. It is my property, and I do not appreciate being accused of theft. Perhaps you should be more careful with your belongings instead of bothering your neighbors." She closed the door in my face before I could respond. I stood there on her porch for a solid minute, trying to process what had just happened. Then I walked back to my cabin, my blood pressure definitely higher than it should be. My wife used to tell me I needed to pick my battles. This felt like a battle worth picking, but I also did not want to escalate things unnecessarily. I was still relatively new to the community. The next day, I drove into Woodland Park and bought another firewood carrier. This one was not quite as nice as my original, but it did the job. I resigned myself to the loss and tried to move on. Deb had stolen my carrier and I knew it, but proving it seemed more trouble than it was worth. Winter continued its grip on the mountains. February brought a massive snowstorm that dumped 3 feet on us in 2 days. I spent hours clearing my driveway and paths, grateful for the workout and the distraction. My consulting work kept me busy, and I started to settle into a routine. I even made friends with a few neighbors. There was Tom Riley, a retired firefighter who lived 2 properties over, and his wife Sandra. They had lived in Pine Ridge Estates for a decade and had plenty of stories about Deb and her HOA antics. She once fined the Petersons $500 because their Christmas lights were up until January 7th. Sandra told me over coffee one afternoon. The HOA rules say all holiday decorations must be down by January 5th. Never mind that we had that ice storm and it was dangerous to get on the roof. Deb did not care. "She drives around the neighborhood with a clipboard," Tom added, "takes notes on everyone's property, looking for violations." "That seems excessive," I said. "That is Deb," Sandra replied. "She has been HOA president for 6 years now. Nobody runs against her because nobody wants the job, and frankly, she makes life miserable for anyone who opposes her." I thought about my stolen firewood carrier but did not mention it. It seemed petty compared to $500 fines. March arrived with those weird mountain mood swings where it is 70 degrees one day and snowing the next. I was still using my fireplace regularly in the evenings. And then, one morning in mid-March, I went to my woodshed and discovered that my second firewood carrier was gone. I did not search this time. I knew exactly where it was. I got in my truck and drove straight to Deb's house. Sure enough, there was a firewood carrier on her porch. This one did not have a tier, but it was the exact same brand and color as the one I had just purchased. This time, I did not bother knocking. I walked right up onto her porch, grabbed the carrier, and headed back to my truck. I was halfway down her driveway when the front door flew open. "Excuse me, what do you think you are doing?" Deb's voice was shrill with indignation. "Taking back my property," I called over my shoulder. "That is theft. I am calling the police." "Go ahead," I said. "I will be happy to explain to them how you have stolen from me twice." I drove home and hung the carrier in my woodshed. My hands were shaking, more from anger than fear. 20 minutes later, a Teller County Sheriff's deputy pulled up to my cabin. Deputy Martinez was in his 30s, professional and polite. I invited him in and explained the situation. He listened carefully, taking notes. "So this is the second time you believe Mrs. Henderson took your firewood carrier?" he asked. "I do not believe it. I know it. The first time I saw it on her porch, she claimed it was hers. This time I just took it back before she could make the same claim." "Do you have proof of purchase for this carrier?" "Yeah, actually. I bought this one last month at the hardware store in Woodland Park. I probably still have the receipt. I found it in my truck, crumpled in the center console with other receipts. The date was clearly marked and the item description matched." Deputy Martinez examined it. "And the first carrier?" "Bought it online. I would have to dig up the email confirmation, but I can do that." He nodded slowly. "Here is the situation, Mr. Morrison. Taking property from someone's porch, even if you believe it is yours, is legally problematic. Mrs. Henderson would have been within her rights to press charges. However, given that you have proof of purchase and this appears to be part of an ongoing dispute, I am going to let this go with a warning. But you cannot take matters into your own hands like this." "So what am I supposed to do when she steals my things?" "Document it and call us. File a report. That creates a paper trail. If this continues, that documentation will be important." After he left, I sat on my couch and stared at the ceiling. This was insane. I had moved to the mountains for peace, and instead I was in a cold war with my HOA president over firewood carriers. That night, Tom and Sandra invited me over for dinner. I told them the whole story, including the visit from Deputy Martinez. "You need to be careful with Deb," Tom warned. "She is vindictive. Last year, the Mitchells had a dispute with her about their deck stain color. It was not on the approved list. They fought the fine, took it to the HOA board. They won the appeal and the fine was dropped. 2 months later, Deb had their property inspected for every possible violation. She found some obscure rule about shed placement and forced them to move their storage shed 3 feet. Cost them $2,000. "That is harassment," I said. "Sure is," Sandra agreed. "But she is clever about it. She always operates within the HOA rules, technically. She just interprets them in whatever way suits her purposes." "What about getting her removed from the board?" "You would need a majority vote from the homeowners," Tom said. "And you would need someone willing to run against her. Like I said, nobody wants that target on their back." I drove home that night with a lot on my mind. The smart move was probably to let the firewood carrier thing go, avoid Deb, and live my life. But something about the injustice of it gnawed at me. She had stolen from me twice, lied about it, and faced 0 consequences. In fact, I was the one who got a warning from the sheriff. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Deb driving past my property more frequently than seemed normal. Her white Lexus would crawl by, and I could see her looking at my cabin, my yard, my woodshed. She was looking for violations, just like Tom had warned. I became hyper-vigilant about HOA rules. I read through the entire covenant document, all 47 pages of dense legal language and arbitrary restrictions. My grass had to be between 2 and 4 inches tall. No vehicles could be parked on the street overnight. No clotheslines visible from the road. Trash cans could only be at the curb on collection day and had to be removed within 12 hours of pickup. Exterior modifications required written approval from the HOA board. The list went on and on. I started taking photos of my property with timestamps, documenting that I was in compliance with every rule. It felt paranoid, but given Deb's pattern of behavior, it seemed necessary. April arrived, bringing real warmth and the glorious mud season that happens when all that snow melts. I was still using my fireplace occasionally on cold nights, and I kept my reclaimed firewood carrier hanging in the woodshed. I checked on it compulsively now, sometimes multiple times a day. On a Tuesday afternoon, I was on a video call with a client when I happened to glance out my window toward the woodshed. A white Lexus was parked on the road near my driveway. As I watched, Deb got out and walked purposefully toward my woodshed. I muted my microphone. "I will need to call you back," I told my client and ended the meeting. By the time I got outside, Deb was coming back from my woodshed with my firewood carrier in her hands. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. She stopped, completely unfazed. "This is HOA property." It was found abandoned in a structure on community land. "That is my woodshed on my property. Actually, if you check your survey, you will find that your woodshed is 3 inches over the property line onto the community green belt. That makes it HOA jurisdiction. And any abandoned property on HOA land can be claimed for community use." I was so angry I could barely form words. "That is insane. You are stealing from me again. I am enforcing HOA rules. Perhaps you should have been more careful about where you built your structures. I will be recommending at the next board meeting that you be fined for the encroachment and required to move the woodshed." She walked back to her Lexus with my carrier, placed it carefully in her trunk, and drove away. I stood in my driveway, shaking with rage. Then I went inside and immediately called the property surveyor, whose name was on my closing documents. He was based in Colorado Springs, but he said he could come out the next day to verify the property lines. Mark Stevenson arrived Wednesday morning with his equipment. He was in his 60s, wearing a vest covered in pockets and a wide-brimmed hat. He spent 2 hours taking measurements and checking his records against the markers on my property. "Well, Mr. Morrison, I have good news and bad news," he said when he finished. "The good news is your woodshed is entirely on your property. It is a good 4 feet inside your boundary line. The bad news is that someone has been moving the property markers." "What?" He showed me the iron stakes that marked the corners of my property. "See how this one is loose in the ground? And this one over here has fresh dirt around it. Someone repositioned these recently. According to my original survey and the county records, your actual property line is here." He pointed to a spot several feet beyond where the markers currently sat. "Can you document this?" I asked. "Absolutely. I will write up a report and file it with the county. If someone is deliberately moving survey markers, that is actually a criminal offense in Colorado. It is considered tampering with boundary markers, which is a Class 2 misdemeanor." "What should I do?" "File a police report," he said. "And I would suggest installing permanent markers that are harder to move. I can do that for you if you would like." I paid Mark to install proper permanent markers and to provide me with 3 copies of his report. Then I called the Teller County Sheriff's Office and filed a report about the moved markers. A different deputy came out this time, took my statement, and reviewed Mark's findings. "You know who might have moved these?" Deputy Carson asked. "I have a pretty good idea," I said. I explained the ongoing situation with Deborah Henderson and the firewood carriers. "That is quite a pattern," she said. "I will include all of this in my report. The challenge is proving who moved the markers. Unless you have video evidence or witnesses, it is going to be hard to pursue charges." "But at least it is documented, right?" "Right. And with the surveyor's report, if Mrs. Henderson tries to claim your woodshed is on HOA property again, you have definitive proof that it is not." After Deputy Carson left, I sat down and wrote a detailed email to Deborah Henderson. I attached the surveyor's report and calmly explained that the woodshed was entirely on my property, as proven by a licensed surveyor and county records. I demanded the return of my firewood carrier within 24 hours, or I would pursue legal action for theft. Her response came 30 minutes later. As HOA president, I have the authority to determine compliance with community standards. Your woodshed remains under review. The item in question is being held pending the outcome of that review. That was it. No acknowledgement of the surveyor's report, no admission of wrongdoing. Just bureaucratic double-speak that meant nothing. I called a lawyer that afternoon. I found a small practice in Woodland Park that handled property disputes. The attorney, Jennifer Walsh, listened to my story and reviewed the documents I had collected. "You have a solid case for theft," she said. 3 documented incidents, proof of purchase for at least one of the items, and a pattern of behavior. You also potentially have a harassment claim, depending on how much more documentation we can gather about her HOA enforcement actions toward you specifically. What would legal action cost me? For something like this, probably a few $1,000s if it is straightforward. If she fights it and it drags out, it could get more expensive. But honestly, Mr. Morrison, sometimes a strongly worded legal letter is enough. People back down when they realize you are serious and have representation. I authorized her to draft a demand letter. It went out the next day via certified mail, outlining the theft claims, the property line issue, and demanding the return of the carrier plus $300 in damages for my time and the cost of the surveyor. Deborah signed for the letter on Friday. By Monday morning, she had filed a formal HOA violation against me. The violation notice appeared in my mailbox, typed on official HOA letterhead. It cited me for unauthorized storage structure placement and failure to maintain approved property aesthetics. The fine was $750, due within 30 days. If I did not pay, the HOA could place a lien on my property. I photographed the notice and immediately sent it to Jennifer Walsh. She called me within the hour. "This is retaliation," she said, clear as day. She received our demand letter and immediately filed bogus violations against you. This actually strengthens your case significantly. Do not pay the fine. We are going to respond to this. Can she really put a lien on my house over this? Only if the fine is legitimate and you fail to pay after exhausting your appeal options. But these violations are not legitimate. Your woodshed is on your property and has been there since before you bought the place. There is nothing in the HOA covenants about storage structure aesthetics that your shed violates. She is abusing her authority, and we are going to demonstrate that. Jennifer drafted a response to the HOA, copying the entire board of directors. The letter detailed the harassment, the theft, the false property line claims, and the retaliatory violation. She demanded an immediate board meeting to address Deborah Henderson's conduct and the dismissal of the bogus fines. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I focused on protecting my property. I was not going to let Deb steal from me a third time. I drove to a farm supply store in Colorado Springs and bought a heavy-duty padlock and hasp. On Saturday morning, I installed it on my woodshed. The woodshed had a door that I had rarely closed before. It was a simple wooden door on hinges, meant more to complete the structure than to provide security. I mounted the hasp on the door frame and hung a padlock through it. Now my firewood and my carrier were secure. I also set up a trail camera, the kind hunters use. I mounted it on a tree about 20 feet from the woodshed, angled to capture anyone approaching. It was motion activated and took both photos and video. If Deb or anyone else came onto my property and tried to access the shed, I would have evidence. Tom saw me installing the setup and walked over. "Fort Knox for Firewood?" he asked with a grin. "I am done playing games," I said. "She has stolen from me 3 times. I am not giving her a 4th opportunity. I do not blame you. Sandra and I will testify at the board meeting if you need witnesses about Deb's behavior. We have seen her targeting you." "I appreciate that," I said. "Honestly, I just want to live here in peace. I do not understand why she has made me her project." "Some people get a little bit of power and it goes to their head," Tom said. "Deb is one of those people. She has been mostly harmless before this, just annoying. But what she is doing to you crosses a line." The 2 weeks before the board meeting felt long. I checked my trail camera every day. It captured plenty of deer, a few elk, some rabbits, and one curious black bear that wandered through my property in the middle of the night. But no Deborah Henderson. I did, however, receive 2 more HOA violation notices. One claimed that my grass was too long, exceeding the 4-inch maximum. I measured it immediately. It was 3 inches. I took photos with a ruler in the frame and time-stamped them. The second notice said I had trash cans visible from the road outside of the permitted times. This was also false. I do not even keep my trash cans where they would be visible from the road. Jennifer documented each false violation. "She is building a paper trail that makes her look diligent and makes you look like a problem homeowner," Jennifer explained. "But she is being sloppy because the violations are demonstrably false. That works in our favor." The board meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived, there were about 15 other homeowners there, which was apparently a huge turnout. Most board meetings had only the 5 board members present. Deborah sat at the front table with the other board members. Bill Patterson, the vice president, Mary Chen, the treasurer, Steve Rowlands, the secretary, and Paula Davis, a general board member. They all looked uncomfortable except Deb, who had that tight smile fixed in place. The meeting started with standard business, approving minutes from the last meeting and reviewing the HOA budget. Then it came time for homeowner concerns. Jennifer stood up. Jennifer Walsh, representing Ryan Morrison. "We are here regarding multiple violations filed against Mr. Morrison, which we believe are retaliatory and false. We are also here to address the theft of Mr. Morrison's property by Mrs. Henderson and her abuse of HOA authority." The room went silent. A few people pulled out their phones, presumably to record. Deb's smile did not waver. "Miss Walsh, this is a homeowners meeting, not a legal proceeding. Mr. Morrison is welcome to address the board, but having legal representation here is highly unusual. Mr. Morrison has the right to representation, especially when facing $750 in fines and potential liens against his property." Jennifer responded calmly. "Now, would you like to discuss this here publicly, or would you prefer to resolve this privately?" Bill Patterson, the vice president, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should hear what this is about. Ryan, you want to explain your side?" I stood up and walked to the front. I had printed copies of everything: the surveyor's report, the receipts for the firewood carriers, the photos of the false violations, the sheriff's reports, and the timeline of events. I distributed them to each board member, then I told my story. I kept it factual and calm, though my heart was racing. I explained the 3 thefts, the moved property markers, the false violations, and how it all started because I had bought property in this neighborhood and had the audacity to own a firewood carrier. Mrs. Henderson has abused her position to harass me, steal from me, an attempt to extort money from me through false fines, I concluded. I just want to live here peacefully, but I will not be bullied, and I will not pay fines for violations I did not commit. Several homeowners started talking at once. Mary Chen, the treasurer, was flipping through the documents with a frown. Steve Rowlands looked horrified. Deborah finally spoke. This is a gross mischaracterization of events. Mr. Morrison has been non-compliant with HOA standards since he moved in. The violations are legitimate. As for his property, I found abandoned items on what I believe to be HOA land. Any confusion about property lines is an honest mistake. 3 times, someone called from the audience. You made an honest mistake 3 times, and moved his survey markers. Another voice added, I did not move any markers, Deb said, her voice rising. That is a serious accusation with no proof. There is a sheriff's report documenting that the markers were tampered with, Jennifer interjected. And a timeline that shows it happened after Mr. Morrison purchased the property and before Mrs. Henderson claimed his woodshed was on HOA land. Bill Patterson held up his hand. Okay, everyone, let us calm down. This is clearly a serious situation. I move that we table the fines against Mr. Morrison pending a full investigation by the board. Second, Mary Chen said immediately. All in favor? Bill asked. 4 hands went up. Only Deborah abstained. The motion passes, Bill said. Deb, I think you and I need to have a private conversation after this meeting. Deborah's face was red now, her composure cracking. This is ridiculous. I have served this community for 6 years. I have kept our property values up and our neighborhood beautiful. And this is the thanks I get. Being ambushed at a board meeting. You stole my property, I said quietly. 3 times. That is not serving the community. That is theft. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Several homeowners wanted to share their own stories about Deb's overreach. The Petersons, who I did not even know, stood up and talked about the Christmas light fine. Another couple described being cited for having the wrong shade of brown on their fence stain. Someone else said Deb had threatened to fine them because their dog barked too much, even though there was no noise ordinance in the HOA rules. Jennifer put a hand on my shoulder. Let us go, she said quietly. You have made your point. Let the board deal with their internal issues now. I followed her out to the parking lot. Through the windows of the clubhouse, I could see people still standing and talking animatedly. Deb was sitting alone at the front table, her arms crossed. What happens now? I asked. We wait, Jennifer said. The board will investigate. Based on what I saw in there, I think you have enough support to get those fines dismissed. As for the theft charges, that is up to you. We can pursue civil action, or you can let it go if you get your carrier back. I want my carrier back, I said, and I want her to leave me alone. I think after tonight she will. 2 days later, I found my Firewood carrier hanging on my front door handle. No note, no apology, just the carrier. It was the second one, the one I had proof of purchase for. The first one never reappeared. A week after that, I received a letter from the HOA board. It was signed by Bill Patterson and informed me that all violations filed against me had been dismissed. The board had conducted a review and found insufficient evidence to support the claims. The letter also noted that HOA leadership was being restructured and that new elections would be held within 60 days. Deborah Henderson resigned from the HOA board 2 weeks later. According to Tom, who heard it from Sandra, who heard it from Mary Chen at the grocery store, Deb had been given a choice: resign voluntarily or face a vote to remove her for cause. She chose resignation. I felt a strange mix of emotions when I heard the news. Relief, mostly. Vindication. But also a little bit of sadness that it had come to this. All of this drama and conflict over firewood carriers and petty power plays, the lock stayed on my woodshed. I figured better safe than sorry. Spring turned into summer, and the mountains exploded with wildflowers. I spent my days working from home and my evenings hiking the trails around Pike National Forest. I started to remember why I had moved here in the first place. In early June, I saw Deborah Henderson one more time. I was at the grocery store in Woodland Park, and she was in the checkout line ahead of me. She did not acknowledge me, just paid for her items and left. She looked older somehow, tired. I wondered if losing the HOA presidency had been harder on her than I realized. That small kingdom had probably been important to her, maybe the most important thing in her life. The new HOA president was a guy named Marcus Taylor who lived on the other side of the development. He was a retired school teacher, calm and reasonable. At his first board meeting, he proposed reducing some of the more ridiculous rules and focusing on things that actually mattered like road maintenance and snow removal. The changes passed unanimously. Life in Pine Ridge Estates got a lot more peaceful after that. I still see Deb's Lexus occasionally, driving through the neighborhood. But she does not slow down at my property anymore. She does not look. She just drives past like I am any other neighbor. I bought a cord of firewood in September, preparing for the coming winter. The guy who delivered it commented on my locked woodshed. "That is smart," he said. "You would be surprised how much firewood theft happens up here in the mountains." "Oh, I would not be surprised at all," I said. He laughed, thinking I was joking. That evening I built a fire in my fireplace. I used my firewood carrier, the one I had fought so hard to keep. The canvas was showing wear now, the leather handles soft from use. It was just a firewood carrier, nothing special. You could buy one at any hardware store or farm supply place, but it was mine. I had paid for it, and I had stood up for my right to keep it. That mattered. Not because of the carrier itself, but because of the principle. Because if you do not stand up to bullies, they keep bullying. Because small injustices, left unchecked, become big ones. The fire crackled and popped, filling my cabin with warmth and light. Outside, the first snow of the season was starting to fall, dusting the pines white. Autumn had been short this year, as it often was in the high country, but I was ready for winter. My woodshed was stocked, my carrier was secure, and my property was finally, truly mine. Tom and Sandra invited me over for dinner that weekend. We sat on their back deck, bundled in fleece jackets, drinking beer and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "You know, you are kind of a legend around here now," Tom said. "The guy who stood up to Deb Henderson and won." "I did not set out to be a legend," I said. "I just wanted to keep my firewood carrier." Sandra laughed. "Well, you did more than that. You freed the rest of us from a tyrant. Do you know how many thank you cards you have coming your way? None, I hope. I did not do it for anyone else. I did it because I was tired of being stolen from." "Still," Tom said, raising his beer bottle, "here is to Ryan Morrison, property owner, firewood carrier defender, and HOA dragon slayer." We clinked bottles, and I smiled despite myself. The truth was, I had moved to Colorado to escape grief and find peace. What I found instead was conflict, frustration, and a crash course in HOA politics. But somewhere along the way, I also found my backbone again. I found the will to fight for what was mine, to not roll over when someone tried to push me around. My wife would have been proud of that. She always said I was too accommodating, too willing to let things slide to avoid confrontation. "Sometimes you have to make waves, Ryan," she used to tell me. "Otherwise people will walk all over you." She was right. Deborah Henderson had tried to walk all over me, and for a while I let her. But eventually I planted my feet and pushed back, and that made all the difference. Winter settled in for real after that. November brought heavy snows and December was a frozen wonderland. I used my fireplace almost every day, going through wood at a steady rate. Each time I went to my woodshed, I unlocked the padlock and retrieved what I needed, then locked it back up. The routine was second nature now. My trail camera continued to capture wildlife. I got some amazing shots of a mountain lion that passed through one night and a family of foxes that denned somewhere nearby. I never got any footage of humans trying to access my woodshed. The lock was apparently deterrent enough. Christmas came and went quietly. I drove down to Denver to spend a few days with my brother's family, then returned to my cabin grateful for the solitude. New Year's Eve, I built a big fire and watched the ball drop on TV, toasting the new year with a glass of bourbon. It had been a strange year, full of unexpected conflicts and small victories. But I was still here, still standing, and my woodshed was still locked up tight. In late January, Marcus Taylor, the new HOA president, knocked on my door. He was a big guy, maybe 6'3", with a gray beard and kind eyes. "Ryan, got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, come on in." He declined the invitation, preferring to talk on my porch. "I wanted to update you on something. Deborah Henderson is selling her house. She is moving to Grand Junction to be closer to her daughter." "Oh," I said. I was not sure how to feel about that news. "When?" She listed it last week. "With the market the way it is up here, it will probably sell fast." "Well, I hope she is happier there," I said, and I meant it. Marcus nodded. "I also wanted to say thank you. What you did, standing up to her at that meeting, it was not easy, but it needed to happen. She had gotten out of control and none of us had the guts to confront it. You did." "I just wanted my firewood carrier back," I said, which was becoming my standard response. He laughed. "Yeah, well, your firewood carrier freed the rest of us. So thanks." After he left, I thought about Deb packing up her house, preparing to move. I wondered if she had any regrets about how things had gone down. I wondered if she understood that she had brought it all on herself. Probably not. People like that rarely do. February marked 1 year since the first firewood carrier had gone missing. I had been in Pine Ridge Estates for over 2 years now, and despite all the drama, I had grown to love this place. The mountains, the wildlife, the changing seasons, even the neighbors. Well, most of the neighbors. I started dating someone that spring. Her name was Emily Zimmerman, and she was a nurse at the hospital in Colorado Springs. We met at a coffee shop in Woodland Park. She had overheard me talking to the barista about trail conditions and jumped into the conversation with her own recommendations. We hiked together the following weekend, and things developed naturally from there. Emily thought the firewood carrier saga was hilarious. "You went to war over a canvas bag?" she asked, laughing. "It was the principle," I said defensively, but I was laughing too. "And it is a really nice canvas bag." "I am dating a firewood carrier revolutionary," she said. "This is amazing." She was good for me. She made me laugh and reminded me that life was not all conflict and property disputes. We spent weekends exploring the mountains, trying new restaurants and slowly building something that felt like it might last. Deb's house sold in March, and she moved away without fanfare. I never saw her again after that day in the grocery store. Her property was bought by a young couple with 2 kids who introduced themselves to the neighborhood with homemade cookies. They were friendly and normal, and I realized what a difference it made to have reasonable people around. The lock stayed on my woodshed, though. Some habits are hard to break, and some precautions are just common sense. My trail camera stayed up too, still capturing the comings and goings of the forest creatures that shared my property. One evening in April, I was stacking a new delivery of firewood in the shed when Emily came by. She watched me work for a while, then picked up the firewood carrier. "This is it?" she asked. "The famous carrier that started everything?" "That is it," I confirmed. She examined it closely, running her fingers over the reinforced handles and the small tier near the bottom. "You know, for something that caused so much trouble, it is really just a bag." "It is not about the bag," I said. "It is about not letting someone take what is yours." "I know," she said softly. "I am glad you fought for it. Shows character." We carried wood together until the shed was restocked, then went inside and made dinner. Later, sitting by the fire with Emily curled up next to me on the couch, I felt something I had not felt in years. Contentment. My wife had been gone for over 4 years now. The grief had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something I could carry without it crushing me. This cabin, these mountains, even the ridiculous drama with Deborah Henderson, it had all been part of my healing journey. I had come here broken and slowly pieced myself back together. Summer arrived with its explosion of green and warmth. Emily and I took a trip to Moab in June, hiking among the red rocks and sleeping under a canopy of stars. When we returned, my woodshed was exactly as I had left it, locked secure, carrier hanging on its hook inside. The HOA under Marcus's leadership had become almost invisible, which was exactly how an HOA should be. They maintained the common areas, organized a neighborhood garage sale, and stayed out of everyone's business. Property values remained stable, and people were generally happy. I ran into Bill Patterson, the former vice president at the hardware store, in July. He was buying paint for his deck. "Ryan, good to see you," he said. "How have things been?" "Quiet," I said, "which is perfect." "I owe you an apology," he said suddenly. "I was on the board during all of Deb's harassment. I saw what was happening and I did not do enough to stop it. I should have spoken up sooner." "You spoke up when it mattered," I said. "At the meeting, you tabled the fines and started the investigation. That took courage." "Still, I am sorry you had to go through all that. It should never have gotten that far." We shook hands, and I left the store feeling like another chapter had finally closed. All the players in the drama had acknowledged the truth and moved forward. That was all I could ask for. Emily moved in with me that fall. It seemed natural, the next logical step. She brought her furniture and her plants and her energy, and suddenly the cabin felt like a home in a way it had not before. We talked about marriage but agreed there was no rush. We were happy, and that was enough. One October evening, we were bringing in firewood together. Emily grabbed the carrier and filled it with logs while I stacked more inside the shed. "You know what I just realized," she said. "Deborah Henderson did you a favor. How do you figure that? If she had not stolen your firewood carrier and caused all that drama, you would not have stood up to her. The HOA would still be a nightmare, and you would not have that great story about being the guy who went to war over firewood." "I guess that is one way to look at it," I said. "Plus, if you had not been at that specific board meeting and I had not heard about it from my friend who lives here, I would not have thought you were so interesting. So really, Deb is responsible for us getting together," I laughed. "That is a reach." "Is it though?" Emily grinned. "Everything is connected. Butterfly effect." We carried the wood inside together and I built a fire while Emily made hot chocolate. The flames caught and grew, throwing shadows on the walls. Outside, the aspens had turned gold and the first frost had arrived. Another winter was coming, my fourth in Pine Ridge Estates. The lock on my woodshed was now just part of the landscape, unremarkable and functional. Sometimes neighbors asked about it, and I would tell them the abbreviated version of the story. It always got laughs and headshakes. Everyone had their own HOA horror story, it seemed. Mine just happened to involve firewood carriers. In November, I got an email from Jennifer Walsh, my lawyer. She was closing her practice and moving to Oregon, and she wanted to check in with all her former clients to make sure everything had been resolved satisfactorily. "More than satisfactorily," I wrote back. "Thank you for everything you did. You helped me stand up to a bully when I needed the support." Her response was brief but warm. "That is what we are here for. Glad it worked out. Enjoy those mountains." December brought serious snow, the kind that makes you grateful for a warm house and a well-stocked woodshed. Emily and I settled into winter routines. Morning coffee by the fire, evening walks in the snow, weekends on the ski slopes. Life was good. Life was peaceful. On Christmas Eve, we hosted Tom and Sandra for dinner. We ate too much food, drank too much wine, and told stories late into the night. Eventually, the conversation turned, as it always did in this neighborhood, to Deborah Henderson. "I heard she is working at a garden center in Grand Junction," Sandra said. "My cousin saw her there, said she seemed happy." "Good for her," I said, and I meant it. I bore no grudge. Deb had been a problem, but she was no longer my problem. She had moved on, and so had I. "You ever think about what you would say to her if you saw her again?" Tom asked. I considered the question. "Probably nothing. What is there to say? It is all done and over with. We are both living different lives now." "Very mature of you," Emily said, squeezing my hand. "I have my moments." The evening wound down, and our friends headed home through the snow. Emily and I cleaned up the kitchen together, a comfortable silence between us. When the dishes were done, I added another log to the fire, and we sat together watching the flames dance. "Happy?" Emily asked. "Yeah," I said. "I really am. It was true." The journey from grief-stricken widower to paranoid property owner to content mountain dweller had been longer and stranger than I could have imagined. But I had arrived. This cabin, this life, this woman beside me, it was exactly where I was supposed to be. The firewood carrier hung in its place in the locked woodshed. The trail camera continued its silent vigil. The mountains stood eternal outside my windows. And I was finally, fully home. 2 years after the first theft, I can look back on the whole situation with something approaching humor. Did I really spend months obsessing over a firewood carrier? Did I really install locks and cameras and hire lawyers over what was essentially a canvas bag? Yes, I did. And I would do it again, because it was never really about the carrier. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. It was about refusing to be a victim in my own home. Deborah Henderson had tried to make me feel small and powerless, and I had refused to accept that role. That refusal had changed everything. The HOA had transformed under new leadership. Marcus Taylor proved to be exactly what the community needed. Someone who cared about actual issues and ignored petty nonsense. Under his guidance, the neighborhood association became what it should have been all along, a service organization rather than an enforcement agency. I learned things about myself during those months of conflict. I learned that I was stronger than I thought. I learned that standing up for yourself, even over small things, matters. I learned that documentation and evidence beat loud accusations every time. And I learned that a supportive community makes all the difference when facing down a bully. Emily brought new joy into my life, but the foundation for that joy had been laid during the HOA wars. By refusing to be pushed around, by fighting for my rights, I had reclaimed a sense of agency that I had lost when my wife died. I was no longer just surviving. I was living fully, engaging with my world, defending my territory. Spring came again, as it always does in the mountains. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. The elk returned to lower elevations. The first wildflowers pushed through the cold earth, and my firewood carrier hung in its place, waiting for next winter. I never found out what happened to the first carrier, the one Deb had claimed was hers. Maybe she still had it in Grand Junction. Maybe she had thrown it away. It did not matter anymore. That was a different chapter, a closed book. What mattered was that I had stood my ground. I had protected what was mine. And in doing so, I had freed not just myself but an entire neighborhood from someone who had abused her small measure of power. The lock on my woodshed would stay. Some precautions are worth maintaining, even after the threat has passed. But I no longer checked my trail camera compulsively or measured my grass with a ruler. I no longer photographed every corner of my property to prove compliance with arbitrary rules. I was no longer living in fear of false violations and retaliatory fines. I was just living. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. On a warm May afternoon, Emily and I hiked up to a ridge overlooking our neighborhood. We could see the entire development spread out below us, including my cabin with its woodshed clearly visible. From this height, all the drama and conflict seemed tiny and insignificant compared to the vast wilderness surrounding us. "Do you think you will ever take the lock off?" Emily asked. "Probably not," I said. "It is a good lock." She laughed and kissed me, and we started back down the trail toward home. The firewood carrier was waiting in its locked shed, ready for the next winter, the next fire, the next chapter of whatever story my life would tell. And I was ready too. Ready for whatever came next, because I had learned the most important lesson of all. When someone tries to take what is yours, you fight to keep it. Not because the thing itself is invaluable, but because your right to own it, to use it, to live your life without harassment, is priceless. Deborah Henderson had tried to steal more than just a firewood carrier. She had tried to steal my peace, my sense of security, my right to exist in my own home without constant scrutiny and punishment. But she had failed. The lock on my woodshed was proof of her failure and my victory. Small, practical, and utterly effective. And somewhere in Grand Junction, maybe Deb had learned something too. Maybe she looked back on her time as HOA president with regret. Maybe she understood now that power without compassion is just tyranny on a small scale. Or maybe she did not. Maybe she told herself a different story, one where she was the victim and I was the villain. It did not matter. Her story was no longer my concern. I had my own story, and it was a good one. It was a story about loss and grief, about starting over in a new place, about facing down a bully and winning. It was a story about locked woodsheds and stolen property, about lawyers and surveyors and sheriff's reports. It was a story about standing up for yourself, even when it is easier to back down. But mostly, it was a story about home, about finding a place where you belong and defending your right to be there. About building a life in the mountains, about warming yourself by a fire fed by wood carried in a canvas bag that cost $80 and was worth so much more. The lock clicked open in my hand, solid and reassuring. I grabbed the carrier, filled it with logs, and carried them inside. Emily had the fire ready, and I fed the flames, watching them grow. Outside, the sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in brilliant colors. This was my home. This was my life. And nobody, not Deborah Henderson or anyone else, was going to take it from me. Not without one hell of a fight. The fire crackled and settled. Emily brought me a beer and curled up next to me on the couch. Somewhere in the mountains, a coyote called out, its voice echoing through the valleys. I raised my beer in a silent toast to the long, strange journey that had brought me here, to firewood carriers and locked sheds, to HOA dragons defeated and new leadership elected, to standing your ground and fighting your battles and never, ever giving up what is yours, but most of all to home. To finding it, defending it and living in it fully, freely, and without fear. The fire burned late into the night, warming my cabin, my home, my sanctuary in the mountains. And in the locked woodshed outside, my firewood carrier hung on its hook, waiting for tomorrow, when the whole peaceful routine would begin again.